I remember the goosebumps when playing the final level in Flower for the first time. And I remember thinking that I had just experienced something truly extraordinary, something poetic in ways that our medium had rarely managed to accomplish. It was one of a handful of key moments in my life where I felt that my arsenal of creativity had been expanded, that my comprehension of the potential of our art form had been elevated. I didn't think I would get another moment like that in a long time where that it could be as powerful. But then I played Journey. The goosebumps were replaced by tears. The experience as a whole moving, enthralling, and inspiring in ways that are still reverberating in my head. Journey is a masterpiece of artistry, pacing, structural and audiovisual design, economy of interaction, and even emergent social behavior. It is the ultimate counterargument to those fools that still somehow doubt the potential of interactivity as art. Thank you to TGC and Sony for creating such an amazing collection of unique, personal, and explorative titles. Thank you for the goosebumps and the tears. Who wouldn't put that in
Dude,
there?
you made me sound so good.
It's wonderfully written, but man, just the thing
It's just really beautifully written.
Everything I ever say, I want you to read it, please.
This is a record, it's an album, but it's an album derived from video game music that I wrote between 13 and 10 years ago. And it was one of those little games that could. No one expected it to be a particularly big deal in the world of video games. And when it came out, it exploded. And for the last 10 years, it's followed me everywhere I went. I've been fortunate to conduct the music for it all over the world. And so to celebrate as a surprise for the people that continue to sustain interest in it, I've kind of rewritten the entire thing as this grand symphonic statement, which it wasn't originally. It was far more intimate. And so I've reconstructed it just for you, which we will release as a surprise to an unwitting, hopefully excited public on March 13th, the exact 10th anniversary of the initial release of the game. And so with that said, why don't we just dive in and see if the music makes slightly more coherent sense than I do.
It tends to be that the initial expression of any art form is the most motivated one, or if not the best one, certainly the one that fits the context the best.
It's your gut, right?
Yeah, because generally you express yourself in the moment, and what comes out reflects at 100% what you're trying to express in that, for a particular
You're not
project.
synthesizing an emotion abstractly, you're just living it.
And Journey was made, the music was made relatively on a budget.
Not relatively.
Well, it was a very tight budget, and but then again, it's part of its charm. I mean, the fact that it's part of its nature, and it's part of what made it great is the fact that it was made that way. Sometimes,
100%.
Very often you take even great movie soundtracks, and then they get reimagined later on, and the magic is completely gone. The spirit is not there anymore.
Sure.
But in this case, it was completely different. I think the maturity, and what Journey has represented over the decade since it has been released has added a whole other layer that just extends that original statement even further. It goes places that the original couldn't go because it hadn't impacted so many people, and it hadn't changed all our lives to the extent that it has. So when Austin actually came to me and he said, I'm thinking about doing this. Do you think we should? I'm like, absolutely. It needs it. It deserves it. It's something. It's a current expression that adds everything, all the emotion and all the history and all of the events that have happened since, from that original event. So it's a separate statement. It's a new thing.
I always have this kind of, it's like I'm on borrowed time kind of feel, where Journey, like I said, with this whole story of I can trace it all back to a single moment. It all feels like it's like this house of cards, or it's like this thing that's so tenuously held together. I can never shake that feeling. Like, just think if one detail had been different, then everything around me I wouldn't know. The people, everything about my life would be.
You might have had other opportunities. Just that
It's
this
true,
was
but,
the one
but
that
this
hit.
life, this configuration of people, it's the odds seem
But,
zero.
You know, there's one thing also, and especially when it comes to this project and what you did with this revision of the score and the extension with the choir and this full size, I mean, incredible orchestra. People don't know, but I've watched this over the last few years. People don't know how freaking hard you work. I mean, yes, I mean, there was a random encounter that, you know, projected your career, that helped you. But I'm convinced something else would have happened if it weren't this one. I'm glad it was this one. But it's the way you treated this project, he slaved over every note, every aspect of this new arrangement over and over again. And it really showed. This version, to me, is, you know, so overwhelming and so complete, you know, and it's so different in a way, while being very respectful and very faithful to the original. But it expands on it in a way that was obviously the result of not just a lot of love, but a lot of work and a lot of thought.
All right, we'll take this up through 76. There's a few other little things I might poke at. One last thing, a bassoon again at 74. You've got a solo that's kind of taking over there, and I'd say come right out with it. This that starts there. Announce yourself straight out of the gate. It all started with, I realized, oh wow, in a few months, the 10th anniversary of the release will hit. And the whole last 10 years, I mean, I get messages every single day from people, whether it's from Twitter or, you know, leaving notes, like they buy it on Bandcamp and leave a little note. They use the feature on there that lets you like attach a note to your purchase, and they show up in my email.
That's cool.
I always feel like that's on borrowed time, where I think at some point it will make its way to the bottom shelf like all things do. And so the fact that there's still this signal. And so I had this thought of, it's not that I wanted to leverage the 10th anniversary or capitalize on it. It was that I've somehow gotten 10 years out of something that most people, you know, their thing comes out, and if they're lucky, they have this week where they're what people are talking about, their game, their movie, their whatever. For that week, they're on top of the world. And I felt like, you know, even if the signal has organically gotten softer, it's never gone away even close. And I just thought, I can write a tweet, hey, y'all, thank you. Like, okay, is there something I can do more meaningful as a way to just say, you've given me so much, but just by little notes, they always come exactly when you need them to, you know? It's like I'll be writing a cue and I'll send it on a new project and they'll say, it's not really working for us, and I'll have this whole downward spiral of I don't know what I'm doing, and then an email will show up that's like, I just want you to know that, you know, my bride and I came down the aisle to your apotheosis last weekend, and here's a photo or something like that. And it's always, they're always cosmically conspiring to send me those exactly when I need them. I just needed to do something that felt like, I'm gonna put this out there and hopefully it communicates how grateful I am, you know, that you've all, whoever has ever sent me an email or whoever even just played the game and just thought to themselves, oh, this is nice, or whatever. It doesn't matter. I have no criteria there. I just wanted to kind of send something back to the world. I don't want to seem underappreciative of the sorcery of what you just did, by the way, just kind of casually sight reading through, what was that, 230 plus bars of material that's not necessarily the most intuitive thing in the world. I've been doing this quite a few years, and it never fails to completely blow my mind that that's even possible for a human to do, never mind collectively and expressively. So just amazing. Let's do it again and improve upon it. 6 clicks into bar 3.
There's something about music that to me, more than wardrobe, more than sets, more than props, can put me into a space, because to me it transforms because it permeates and it allows me to be like, oh, this is the different space that I'm in. It changes our mood. It makes
I was gonna say, it also, because it sort of speaks to you in a non-rational, it doesn't make you make this checklist of, oh, I need to walk this way or do all this thing. It kind of cuts past all of that and goes directly into something more primal.
It's less prescriptive, it's more primal. Yeah, there's something, and especially when I listen to a lot of, I'm like you, I listen to a lot of scores and I listen to a lot of soundtracks. The thing that I love about a score is that it was something that was written just for that, as opposed to a song that's written for, it may have been inspired by a specific story or a specific event or a specific feeling or whatever, but a score it's chasing after something. Mm-hmm. And in working so harmoniously with the thing that it is trying to score, or the thing that it is underscoring.
There's always been that, division between music as a pure expression of itself.
Right.
Generally in a concert hall, or then, in songs and everything else. But when you take music and all of its powers and all of its magic and you combine it with narrative, with other dynamic art forms like theater, in operatic settings or in film, in games, when that marriage works, like I said, it's the texture, they blend together. There are some composers and some filmmakers and some game developers that manage to hit that perfect symbiosis, that combination where you cannot separate the two anymore. They become one and all. And the moment you hear that, brings back everything else. All of the other experiences that come with it immediately rush back into your brain. Even when you're studying, you have a journey in the background and you play the game, it's there. There is something about that experience that you had, about what you felt when you played that game that remains with you, even when it's just in the background and you're doing something else. It gets even richer. Games like Journey, when I played it, I felt, especially in the more interactive aspects of the score that you explored, it was one of the most successful exploration of interactive music that I've experienced so far.
Violins, can I just hear real quickly how this aleatory at 17, I'll just do it on the stick real quick, just first and seconds, 2, 3, and. Okay, yeah, that's fine. It should feel like you're sort of almost in time with this figure. It's written to not, it's a little faster or a little slower.
I have a question about that because you were scoring something that is interactive, right? So you're scoring something that is specifically written to be an if-then statement, right? Cause and effect. If this happens, then this happens. There isn't that when you're in front of an orchestra, right? So how do you take that, and it's so hard to you can't just spit out a soundtrack, right? Because you're like, well, it depends on, did you do this, did you do this? So how does that process happen to be able to take something that was so designed for interactivity and then make it something that's more observational? It's more like watching a movie than playing one.
It's a funny evolutionary process that Journey particularly went through because of that, where I remember I'd only released a couple of soundtrack albums up to that point, and they were all for films. All my film score work up to that point, it's a lot more straightforward, where here's the cue, maybe it's not as interesting on its own, so here's another one we can combine it with perhaps, or maybe just drop that cue and don't include it on the album because it doesn't really add much to the, to the experience. In the video game, and especially with something like Journey, I remember I wasn't sure what to do. I hadn't done it before. So remember what I did was I just kind of loaded all the sort of building blocks of the cues into a playlist, but I took kind of the component parts and I just laid them all out, and I remember I burned it onto a CD and I put it in my car and I drove around, and I hated it. I was like, holy crap, what have I been doing for the last 3 years? This is the most boring, it's so like plodding, and it takes us forever to arrive at any kind of statement, and by the time it gets there you don't care, and I hated it. And this process ended up taking me a month. I did version after version after version, where I started to say, well, what kind of music can emerge? What is the track that is built from these elements?
What's the song version of it?
That's the song version, yeah. And so especially in some cases, I did huge amounts of, not only did I subjectively rearrange things. But I realized, you know, I shouldn't feel beholden to the game, actually. I'm not going to introduce material that's not from the Journey's score to this, but what if I just did things that you actually couldn't recreate this in the game? It's not set up for this. So I remember, like, for example, on the track called Threshold, which is sort of the playground level of the game. You know, remember Genova said, I want this to feel like when you're a teenager, that just nothing can go wrong. That was his direction on that level. I remember the music starts off very kind of quiet and understated and meditative. And it was written where there's all these little things that happen until you encounter the first little piece of wreckage and the little thing comes swimming out of it, and then the music kind of uplifts into an almost waltz. And it's the first little injection of energy you get in the whole game. Well, technically the second, but it's the first kind of moment where you really feel like, oh, this isn't just sort of lonely and desolate, but there's a fun side to this too. It's really, you know, and this is where you're really engaged now with another player potentially, and it starts to really change the emotional landscape of the experience. I remember, you know, first thing I did is realize, you know, that's what our people are going to remember about this. So all the kind of meditative warm-up that you get leading up to that, I said, I'm not even, just cut it. Come straight in from the thing that, so I've already done a thing that you can't do in game, which is skip the kind of prelude to that fun section. And then I fell so in love with the musicians that I was working with. You know, there's these 5 soloists in particular, Tina Guo, Amy Tatum, Sharissa Barger, Rodney Wirtz, and Noah Gladstone. And they're all really interconnected with the systems. You know, the harp is only ever there if you're connected online to another player, for example. So you will never hear harp in that game if you have a single player experience. While working on the album, I thought, you know, some of these accompanimental figures, when I listened to the stem, it's kind of nice. So I just said, I'm just going to isolate that. So, you know, the music comes and builds to this peak, and then I just drop and I go back to the beginning section, but just the harp. And so it's like, then I just give you this, and I kind of let this piece emerge out of the building blocks that you cannot replicate in game. And if you were to sort of look at a map of the level and try to see where all the component parts from, you'd kind of be teleporting around, kind of. I mean, it follows the general progression of the music, because there's definitely a progression to the music. And I do follow that and honor that. But within that, I kind of just let it be a thing. So then the funny thing is, that now, because the album is out there and for 10 years now, and everyone who's heard it that way, including me, it's sort of like that is the version of that music now. So when it came time to make this, I actually used that as my roadmap, but then I found places where I thought, well, it doesn't have to do that. I can do whatever I want. So it's like, it really is like the actual biological evolution where I'm not bouncing off of the source, I'm bouncing off of the thing that came right behind me, which in this case would have been not just the album, but the experience from doing it live so many times in concerts, and just feeling those moments where I can feel the audience really leaning into certain things and others and going, oh, it would be kind of fun to maybe give those little bits a moment, you know, let those speak a little bit, and just not being held prisoner by the original, but obviously, as you mentioned, the respect for it. I thought the ultimate arrogance would be to say, I'm gonna fix it, and I'm gonna rewrite it and give it this new form so we can say to hell with the old one. It was like, how do I make something that can sit comfortably alongside it and be a complementary piece, which is, I derailed myself. Just this tweet they wrote, I listened to this almost daily for 2 years in my study playlist before I played the game. I already love the score, but being able to contextualize and visualize the choices you made musically to accompany the game was an experience that this is an experience that I wish I could have again for the first time. And it was such a crystallization of, if I'm different enough to be decidedly new, but faithful enough that it's clearly that, it might give people the chance to actually feel something close to that, where they get to have it for the first time again. And that would be my dream takeaway, I should say. If somebody listens to this and feels like, it took me on all the lows and highs and emotional peaks and valleys, but in a way that had the crisp, fresh quality and didn't feel too self-aware and all those kinds of things, then the dream will have been hit.
I think you hit the dream. Games are being developed. It's a small industry. People talk. We knew about Journey. We knew it was happening. I remember distinctly how confused a lot of people were. There was a lot of concern. You know, producers and people putting the money on things, they're always very concerned. And you know, good reason. And artists are complicated, as you very well know.
How do you even make a trailer that kind of gets
so
the
when
point?
they describe some of the ideas, people will go, what? You know, so the multiplayer, but you don't actually engage with it. It just happens on its own. You don't know who you're connecting with, and there is no combat. There are no real puzzles. What? You know?
Yeah, well, it sounds like you're describing a bad game.
Yeah, and then of course, the thing is that generally the games that are so specifically visionary tend to be made by very, very small team and small teams. And in the case of Journey, actually grew to a, you know, for an indie title, or at least certainly at the beginning, at least for as far as Sony external development, it was a small title. It grew to a respectable size, something where, you know, the kind of cost you're dealing with starts to, you know, raise some questions.
Yeah, right.
We followed the development. We were all very curious, and I still remember so vividly the day that it finally got released, and I got home, and I said to play. And you know, I'm known to be, you know, not a person that goes in the middle when it comes to emotional response to things. I either go, you know, completely insane, or okay, you know, whatever. And I played this game, which was, you know, under 3 hours. It was, everything about it blew my mind. But I played it at cinema because I had my son, who was 6 at this point, and he had the attention span of a cricket, and he sat through the whole thing. I don't think I've ever, even today, he wouldn't do that, you know. But he sat there, he was completely transfixed. He was just blown away. And my other son was 12 around the time. They both just sat there and watched me play this game. And I discovered this whole thing. I knew what it was about, but the way it was delivered, the artistry of it all, the uniqueness of the experience. It's one of those moments where you play something and you feel, this has changed the way we make games. It has opened up my mind to, you know, something new, something I didn't know you could do with games. You know, it has happened a few times in my life, and of course, in this case, everything about it was amazing, you know, and unique. But the music, oh man, the music, the music was such an integral part of the texture with all of the experience. You could not try playing Journey without the music. It doesn't exist. The music is an essential part of the fabric of the game, of the experience. It literally is more essential than it is in most games, certainly. I would say in almost all.
I mean, we kind of jokingly referred to the score as the narrator, because really Genova was like, I want the story beats and the gameplay beats to be clarified through music. Like, I'm not afraid of. It's very easy. I'm not afraid to give you this responsibility, and I'm the one who has to figure out how the hell to do that.
Well, my response was,
terrifying.
I heard the thing, and you know, I'm climbing that mountain at the end, and the thing, I'm like, oh my God, we finished at the end. And then when he starts showing you the names of the people, I guess we can do spoilers. It's been freaking a decade.
It's been 10 years.
Yeah. He shows you the names of the people you connected with and everything else. I was literally blown away. The very next morning, I became such a huge fan that the people inside of Sony, when they did the collector's edition, they asked me to write the liner notes for the thing, because they knew there was nobody more enthused about this game than myself. And I wrote to Eric Hook at Sony Santa Monica, and I said, man, I need to meet this composer guy, Austin Wintory. He needs to come down. We need to talk to him. We need to, you know, see what's up. And next thing he goes, sure. You know, the next thing you know, he was down at our studio, and that's how he and I begin the connection, which then got taken to an unhealthy level over the following decade.
It was one of those surreal moments where, you know, I'd been hustling for the better part of a decade already at that point in my career, even as starting as an 18-year-old college student trying to get gigs of every kind I could get, you know, advertising, TV commercials, short films, feature films. And I had gotten to a place of near stability with my career by that point. You know, I was scoring a bunch of movies, and like I think I scored 15 feature films or something while we were working on Journey. Like it was all very low paying work and stuff, but like I was surviving on music, which to me was always, that's the bench, everything past that's gravy. And this was the first time that calls just suddenly started coming. And so I remember when Eric called me and he has, you know, there's another developer that we're working with and we think that you could be a really interesting match and we'd love to get your imprint on this game and would you be interested in going and meeting these folks at Ready at Dawn? And so I remember driving down there and it's still to this day one of the most surreal. Because this came out not long, like a little ways later, and that's because they had, I think it had just come out basically, because I went down there and they go, so you're going to be meeting with these guys, Rue and Dana, but there's someone we're instructed to take you to before your meeting starts. And I'm led to his desk and I see there's like DVDs of Puccini and Verdi and like just scattered on the desk. And so it's like the immediate first impression, like this is our chief technical officer and co-founder of the company. So, and then this Hulk comes appearing and it's like every aspect of this is just stacking into one like Salvador Dali painting after another. And then the thing that was truly surreal, never had an experience like this, was that I'm there hoping I'll get a job. And he hands me this and goes, will you sign my copy of this? And like, the note that starts a meeting on is a very good one. It was such a baffling moment to just, I don't even know how to describe it. It's 10 years later and I'm still kind of like, I don't even know how to process that moment. But obviously it began an unimaginably treasured relationship.
It still comes back to me all the time just how incredible this orchestra was. From the first note they played, it's like the balance, you know, the way in which they were aware of each other. From the first reading of the music, absolutely blew my mind. I mean, the moment that we heard, you know, that orchestra playing, I mean, you were there.
Sitting next to you, I mean, you had a wonderful seat in that place.
Yeah.
You were in front of all these.
Yeah.
But man, where we had this top-down global view. We're looking down over the musicians, and I'm looking next to Andrea, and he's just hunched over the rail, and I can't see his face. And we're trying to be quiet because, as you remember, it was a really live room. And
I feel like we blew takes because of our heartbeat.
Yeah, it was like, hey, someone's breathing. We're like, we don't know what to do. And so we're all being super quiet. And I look over at the end of the first cue, and it was them sight reading.
Very nice reading, yes.
I look over and Andrea is crying.
Yeah, I do that a lot, unfortunately.
I was crying too.
The worst part was that I was crying so much that my nose was running, and then
the only thing you could
find a freaking, you know, napkin or a tissue or something. So I went and found some of those. What are they called?
Disinfectant
wipes. And I wiped my nose with the disinfectant wipes and caused.
Not smart.
No, not very smart. I never said I was smart.
Yeah, I love you just in pain.
There's something that there's
so overwhelming.
Scorched earth your face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who's making a noise? Is it film crew?
Upstairs, somebody's walking. I'm not sure.
Are you hearing it?
I definitely heard a few things in the beginning, yes. Oh, I think it's here.
Been listening to music for my whole life. I've been lucky to attend countless, you know, performances. But when something is truly special, you just recognize it immediately. And this, I know you felt the same way. I could see it.
I genuinely, you know, the single that has emerged out of Journey is the music from the finale, which incidentally was the hardest one to do, to get right. Wrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it. But this piece that we later called Apotheosis, that is the one that's been played in concert just endlessly, and I've conducted it numerous times, and it was fun when on the last day with the orchestra. I wanted to end with that piece. We made the schedule work out so that that could be the finale of the sessions. was the only time that I almost really kind of lost it while conducting, because that piece has become like this, it's like this travel companion. You know, every time I get invited to conduct it again, or I just get someone reaches out, contacts me and says, hey, we'd like to perform this at a concert we're doing in the fall.
This is the one you're going to do. We're going to give you the one you're going to do.
It comes up, well, that actually is the funny thing, is I remember there was an opportunity to do it live right after Journey came out. And so I remember, and they said, we're going to have a full orchestra, and it wasn't written for traditional full orchestra. So I remember I did a version of it at the time where I went and looked at the material and I said, okay, well, let me just find a way, because there were all these electronic parts, and I thought, well, I can just make the French horns play the synth pad parts and things like that and leverage the orchestra without fundamentally changing the piece. So I made this version, and I remember they played it and I didn't like it at all. So then I revised the version, and then it got played again, and I was like, okay, now it feels right. And so the funny thing was that when it came time to do this album, I kind of went and just took that and said, how can I just flesh this out? Because that was already the one step forward, but now it wasn't a standalone piece anymore. Now it had to also be the end, or the penultimate moment of this new iteration. So it was answering to several forces, but still, that piece has become such this recurring thing in my life. And you know, it's always, you know, with Spotify and all the rest, I just get so much feedback that piece somehow still makes its way into people's lives. So when it came time to do it with the orchestra, I was like, let's just read through this entirely. It's a single 7.5 minute unbroken sight read rehearsal take, and probably could have used that take on the final album, to be honest. I mean, it was the most unreal. And it's one of those pieces that just builds and builds and builds on itself, and it really is all about this aggregating momentum, because it's the finale of the game, where that's literally what you're doing as a player. And it took a long time compositionally back, you know, 10 plus years ago, to get that feeling right of it feels like it's just gaining mass and gaining speed. And I never really have that out-of-body experience with my own music. I'm always very aware, and I'm always, especially when you're conducting, you're thinking, you know, okay, clarinet needs a cue and 3 bars, and there's a lot going through your mind, but there was something that somehow I managed to get outside myself, and I just felt that momentum that the piece is trying to build while I was conducting it, and I really found myself, you know, my eyes were definitely welled. I was able to hold back from a full-on explosion, but it was this weird thing of like, it's like, I've just met an old friend that I've not seen in ages, and yet paradoxically I see them all the time. You'll hear the orchestra is kind of doing this boom, 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 boom on the first 2 beats. Can you just accent to kind of mirror them just a touch? So, you know, yeah, it doesn't probably even need to be that much. Just a little juice to kind of play with they're kind of naturally accenting you by just the notes they're playing. So just kind of meeting them in the middle, kind of.
Here you are, there's 10 years separating you from that first moment of driving down the 405 towards your studio in Burbank and wrangling Tina Guo, who you would obviously have a long relationship with, and getting into your old studio, $200 mic, MIDI mock-up strings that would stay in there almost to the end. And then you cut to, you're standing in front of 90 of the greatest musicians in the world in a beautiful 18th century cathedral that's now been converted into the home recording space and studio for the London Symphony Orchestra, and you're standing on the same podium that someone like John Williams does, and you pick up the baton. I want to know what that is. There
it feels like
moment?
You're talking about someone else.
Was it an out-of-body experience?
Yeah, and because the more I think about it, you know, it wasn't that long ago. It was inside of a month ago, and yet, like when I look back at the photos, part of it is, especially, you know, as I've gotten more ambitious in my career with what I'm trying to achieve in the studio, I kind of do go into a little bit of a warrior mode, and then I look back if we are filming or whatever, and I'll look and I'll kind of not remember any of that. I'll just kind of think, you know, I don't like, not to compare myself, but I always remember loving this story of November 14th, 1943, when Leonard Bernstein had his unplanned debut with the New York Philharmonic as the substitute for the sick Bruno Walter, which was an unprecedented thing, and you had the triplicate unprecedented qualities of a young American Jewish conductor. All three of those were cultural no-nos, standing up in front of the New York Philharmonic with no rehearsal on a concert that was broadcast live on radio across country. And it's what made him, it was on the front page of the New York Times the next day because it crushed it. And it made him a household name and instantly launched his career at age 25. And when people would ask him, you know, what was that like? He goes, I remember I gave the downbeat and then I heard the applause that the concert was over. And it's, you know, he was a storyteller. Part of me has the skepticism of like, yes, that sounds very romantic or whatever, but hearing you talk about, you know, the LSO, I'm like, yeah, if it weren't for the recording, I almost wouldn't believe it happened. You know, especially given the pedigree of the musicians, and like you said, you know, the name, you know, Abbey Road was the first recording studio built in the history of humanity. The first purpose made, this room is being made to create music, and the first people to record there were the London Symphony. So it's like, they are integrally connected to the history of just capturing music. And never mind that they also lay claim to some of the best orchestral recordings that have been made since we dipped our toes into this art form as a species. So it's like, and to think I was a kid when I wrote this music. You know, I still always feel like I don't really know what I'm doing, but I really didn't know what I was doing. You know, and it's been so good to me the last 10 years, but you know, I thought the highlight was going to be sitting there at Albert Hall listening to the Royal Philharmonic play this music at their PlayStation retrospective concert that they did. That was surreal enough, and I thought, okay, this is probably the peak, and it's going to start to be like the Forrest Gump feather from here. And but somehow we redefined the peak of just how wild this thing can be and how utterly surreal the gift that keeps on giving, the journey can be. Well,
let me ask you to that point, because yes, you were young when you made this, and it's now almost no longer yours, right? It doesn't, you set it out, and we always compare it as artists to our children, and our babies are born. That baby is now walking, driving, has a job, and is going to college.
Yeah,
you know?
Getting drunk and yeah.
So, why, if it's clearly moved people so much, and not just like globally, millions of people have stories like yours, maybe not as eloquent, but there's cosplayers, there's people who this music has touched in such a unique way. It's people have walked down the aisle to this. You've told me stories about people have held the hands of their dying loved ones with this music playing. Why touch it again? Why change it? Is it not preserved? What made you say what I want to do is reimagine this, not re-record it, reimagine it?
Because it needed to be done.